always wanted to do more, and be more creative, and get through that barrier, and somehow be more like the composers whose music I was playing. I remember this as a young boy. We were saying Bruno was talking as a pianist. I had exactly the same experience. The music came to us in schools, and there was always this feeling of a conceptual kind of barrier, this wall between myself and the music. So for my teachers, of course, we studied the biographies. We talked about the organ. You can talk about registration. You can talk about the practice of the music. But somehow this doesn't remove the barrier. It's like you still don't really know where the music came from and why it's there. So, what are the musical decisions that led to the music? And this is what I really wanted to discover in improvisation. I mean, I was aware of people who improvise, particularly organists, where the practice still continues. But it wasn't clear to me. Well, okay, of course we can all try and be a virtuosic improviser, but that's not really, that was like in a way, a modern construct. It's like the virtuoso improviser that does this extraordinary skill. No, I wanted, in a way, to use improvisation as a way of getting beneath the surface of the music. And this is what I want to talk about today. So it's really, in a cognitive way, it's as much about mental representation. How do we imagine and construct the score in our heads? What does it mean to us? So if we just get the, I'm going to need somebody on the controls because I'm going to go here.
It's the screensaver.
If we could get the PDF of the Bach back up. So this is, yeah, here we are. This is the piece that's based on the chorale theme, which is very common practice, and I'll give you a quick tour through the piece. We get rid of the Netflix. I don't need that.
Oh.
It is written for organ, and ideally I would illustrate this as much on the organ as it goes on the harpsichord. It's really clearly not a harpsichord chorale partita, but it doesn't matter. In a way, we could say, okay, it's the registrations of the organ, which are extremely colourful. They're also another layer of knowledge and practice that can be kind of also quite distracting. So we're going to talk really about nuts and bolts today. But so, quick tour through the piece. What you have is, for Bach, quite a simple harmonisation. They do get more simple than this. I could just as easily just play the theme, which is. We just go down through the piece. What he does is give it a kind of extraordinary amount of treatment. So the theme, which you could say, is almost, like these chorales. They're like folk songs. They're congregational material. If we could go down, look through the pages. So going down, you see now we have a duet. There's two voices, extended figurations in the left hand, and then an ornamented. Loosely around the theme, but it's you could almost say it's two variations in one. Actually, it's because you have this. And then this ornamented theme on the top. If we carry on down, because I have to make this quite a quick tool. That's quite a long one, so keep going. Yeah. Then we're on to a set of more simple ones. It goes back into 4 parts.
which is quite an important principle in this stuff. That I mean, if we look at the organ literature of the Baroque, it's nearly always written in 4 parts. Or also the Renaissance as well, the repertoire that that Alice was talking about. So we have one in 4 parts there, which is more relaxed. It's kind of feeling its way through the chorale theme. We keep going down. This one's one of these quick ones. You just do. You see the first note of every 4 semiquavers in the right hand is the theme. So it's a clear embellishment of the melodic material. We keep going down. Another 4-part one, a bit more relaxed, a bit more chamber-like. Keep going down. Then one of these characteristic ones, that would probably be played on a bassoon stop in the left hand. So you have a Bach had a fight with the bassoons quite famously in his early life. And I always felt that these ones were kind of, you know, because you could imagine this have a bassoon player having a kind of nightmare trying to get through all that. But yeah, and they sound great on the Baroque organ. So if we go down, this is one now in triple time, and in 4 parts, but often in 3. Keep going down. And what's happening in terms of, I guess we call social practice, is that the people listening to this are absorbing the theme. The tune, which many of them would know anyway, I mean most of these are based on well-known themes, it's being kind of pushed, and here it is here, and here it is there, and given another dimension. And the idea, as my teacher in Stuttgart said, who was a organist in a similar position, where you also improvise on a hymn, the first hymn of the day, it's quite characteristic to improvise on that, is to encourage people to sing. In fact, by the time you've listened to a set of various hymns, you're desperate to sing because you want to be part of it. So it's you can say all this in psychological terms is to communicate and inspire people to get involved with the theme. Now what happens is the theme goes into the bass. For this nice dramatic one in 3 parts. It's only 3, but it sounds like more in time. So with lots of suspensions that go on, and the theme is in the bass, so he has to harmonise it from it. In a way, turns it on its head, so harmonising from above. Let's go down. Now this is also in triple time, but in kind of more extended. So instead of triplets, we now have sextuplets in the decoration. And the theme is back on the top, and it's very clever because the sextuplets are kind of handed between the hands. The feet are just kind of dabbing around with kind of harmonic points in the bass. So let's keep going. This one is the theme is in the pedals. It's in the bass. We're back in. We're still in triple time. We're in a very different kind of triple time, where you've got a kind of 2-part invention in the hands, or there's a very strong imitation, or little canonic figures going around the theme in the bass. Let's carry on. No, this is one of my favourite ones. It's what I call the big finale. It's where you have a kind of introduction, organo pleno, full organ, nice walking tempo, you've already got 1, 2, 3, 4 parts going, and then the chorale comes in a big cantus firmus. And between the phrases of the theme, you also have this this kind of concerto continues in the tutti. And it's a fabulous effect. Let's just carry on to the end. The final variation is basically just bringing it to a close. It's a rich harmonisation in 5 parts. So with sometimes there's also 3 or 4 if you play it slowly enough and there's enough moving parts. So that's the piece that that I've taken as the model today. And what does it mean? I mean, as an interpretive musician, how can one possibly start to make one's own music based on a model? When I started this study, it was what I wanted to do was to, first of all, teach myself how to improvise, but I also sensed a gap in literature. There was all these manuals on kind of how you can improvise, you know, you just do these exercises. At the same time, nobody that I knew improvised, at least not in a classical thing. It hadn't really happened at the institutions I'd been at, even though I was a student with Gabriella Montero. She didn't do any improvising in the Royal Academy of Music, she just left it outside. That was clearly not the place to be doing it. And there was not really much knowledge about how people actually improvised. I mean, a lot of the psychological literature that I was interested in speculated about how experts might improvise, but a lot of this was kind of written in computer language. It was talking about how they overcame barriers of attention, or it was about information processing at speed and this kind of stuff. Not stuff that really helps you to improvise. And so what I wanted to do was write find out what was the hidden knowledge. If I studied myself, learning to improvise, however long it would take, you get 3 years to do a doctorate, but it took me 6 in the end. What would that process be? But what I came up against straight away was kind of emotional and cognitive barriers, because I just wasn't, my understanding of music didn't allow me to improvise. What I'd understood through learning to play the piano and learning to play the organ was that you had to play every note in the score. Every note was fixed, and it was all there for a reason. If you changed a note that Bach wrote, first of all, it was a bad thing to do. But why was it bad? Because you were changing the meaning of the piece. That by playing all the notes in their order, in this careful arrangement that the genius had created, you, the listeners, would understand some hidden and, I guess, transcendental, eternal message that was written into the piece. And so if I started changing or messing around with that, that was going to mess around with the message, and that would be catastrophic. I found a very good account of all this in Lydia Gurr's The Imaginary Museum of Musical Works, which I drew on a lot for my PhD. But in fact, this is now kind of quite a well-trodden path in research, as people are saying, you know, these ideas about the text, that every note has to be in the place, that meanings are encoded into written works. Daniel Leach Wilkinson has also, you know, raged about this in his publications as well. Unfortunately, it's still not really reaching the practice side of things, but you know, we're all trying to correct that. So yeah, I came up against the kind of the culture of my own learning with quite a bump. But still, I had to find a way through these barriers. And of course, in the end, the only way is just to try. That you learn through actions and through moving and trial and error. And I think also the discipline of the autoethnographic studies. So I had to take journals, I had to record myself, and through recording I found quite a different account of my experience than I had when I was actually improvising. Because as soon as I started improvising, it all sounded awful, and I felt like a hooligan. And, or at least, you know, I was just wrecking everything, and I didn't want anyone to hear me, and all that kind of stuff. But when I wrote about it, I was reporting on progress and clear goals and much more constructive feedback. So that's something I also encourage my students to do, is to take journals, stand outside yourself, get a different perspective on your work. Now, if we could go on to the chorale themes. What I want to try and communicate to you today is that a different perspective of musical text and structure is based on concepts. And this is kind of when you start to sense the way that music is organised over time, kind of underlying functions. Now, when I started, I would take a model as this, but I didn't really know how to get near it. So I spent a lot of time kind of trying to improvise what I would call just generic prelude material. So I had some ideas from, you know, Bach, 48 Preludes and Fugues, and I was it was kind of frustrating because this took a long time doing this kind of stuff. And however I tried to do a new piece, I sort of... And it always ended up being... Always going back to the same way. My son said, "Daddy, it always sounds the same." But I realised now looking back, actually, this is a very important part of learning, because what I was doing was absorbing physically and creating these important relationships, these voice leading patterns, which underlie all this kind of keyboard material, and which I later learned to bring towards my more stylistic forms. You know, one of the things that's very important with improvising is not to have too much theory, to think too much about it. But at the same time, you need to be quite sure of yourself, you need to be quite certain about things, otherwise you're always checking, and that wastes time and focus. So either you just don't care, which is one way, but that doesn't really work when you're doing historical repertoire, because it just sounds a mess. So you have to find principles that are going to turn off the questioning and make you a little bit more certain about what you're doing. And I found these principles actually in Joseph Fuchs's his principles of his descriptions of intervals and their motions, which is in the introduction to the species counterpoint. And there he clearly distinguishes between strong consonant intervals, which are octave and a fifth, and then you have imperfect consonances, which are the thirds and the sixths. They're not so strong, so most of the motion is in thirds and sixths. And if you think about it, I mean, a lot of this repertoire. Whereas the octaves and the fifths are used, they're more to kind of meeting points of lines and things. And in a way, more importantly, he talks about motions, that you have parallel motion of intervals, and then you have contrary motion, and you have oblique motions here. And this is very good because they're very nice images that you can use to construct and understand your own voice leading textures. So for example, the first task would be to harmonise to start with a harmonisation of the theme. And we need to choose a theme. If you can just scroll lightly through, and if these are themes that, I mean, I try to choose ones that I don't know so well, so that I can honestly show you how one gets into a theme. This is not a prepared one that I would do for a concert. Okay? Now, if you see what you'd like me to do, then yell out. And this one, Ars Tief Nord. Yes, not so well known Ars Tief Nord, which is quite good. Okay, so we have this one in G major. You sure you want one? Would like to choose another one? So, if we use Fuchs's principles, we can construct a nice bass line using his consonances. Chords with that, then we've got our beginning of a harmonization. Sometimes it doesn't, and also there are also lots of choices. Like in the first phrase, you can start to hint towards D major. You could have that, for example, instead. Sometimes with these themes, there's a lot of uncertainty about what you're doing. And I've also chosen quite a simple way to harmonise, which is within 4 parts I put 3 voices in the right and 1 in the left, which means I can focus more on my bass line. If I was going to harmonise 2 in 2, then it becomes a little bit more complicated. Work a bit nicer. More risk of parallel octaves and so what I want to say is that while one's improvising, there's already a desire to simplify a bit, because the harmonisation, even when you're trying to keep the harmonisation simple, I'm thinking of the situation where you're actually improvising. So you're actually in church doing these variations, because this is where all the music comes from. This is the point I want to make. The music comes from a practice of improvisation. I read an article recently that was talking about Buxtehude, who was a big hero of Bach's, that it's impossible for some of his works to be actually played on the organ he played on. And this this shows in a way that the written text, it comes after the event. Is that it was very natural for these guys to just improvise the chorale variations in situ. But then if it came out well, or they wanted to make a model, or the chorale itself was important, they could do a written version afterwards. And the written version would kind of gives you a chance to reflect on something, it gives you a chance to kind of dot the I's and cross the T's and get everything in line. But it doesn't change the fact that it's come from an improvisational practice. So we've got our harmonisation as a theme, but we're still finding out, look at the gremlins that we have to do. We're still in a way finding out what the harmony of the chorale can be. So it's very natural, I think, for the next variation to be a simplification, which means going into 2 parts and trying to see more clearly these underlying relationships of consonance and dissonance. So. Things become clearer, it's quite natural to start to embellish a bit. It's just, you just do it. I mean, because melody note. Yeah. Now, in the written version, or if I had the experience of Bach and wanted to, 3 minutes left, and I wanted to, really expand the form, I could make an introduction. Now, if our time is running short, I'll tell you that it's possible to go through all these in the same way and find underlying concepts or the keys to making similar kinds of variations. But we can bring even something as rich as the gegrüsset piece down to a few principles, which is we have up to 4 parts in the texture. And the melody line can be in any of those parts. It can be in the soprano, alto, tenor, or bass. We have duplo or triple time, which means in this one was duplo. We can also change that to make it into triple time, quite easy. Yeah, and that also can be and so on and so forth. And also, that's the second principle. The third principle is that Bach was drawing on a repertoire of things that people did, characteristic rhythms and ways of constructing which you can just do that. So for my PhD recital, I was given a theme by the external examiner, which is John Rink in this case, and then I quickly notated 10 variations of things that I could do, because I knew by then quite a lot of variations. So with that theme, it would work to make a there'd be one that would be and you just jot down the first 2 bars of each one. You can do the chorale prelude, which is where you have the theme comes in an imitative way in the voices. So. So between those 3 principles, you can make almost infinite number of variations. And I was even going to say that as an open work way that we could do that now. We could suggest putting the theme in the alto or the tenor or whatever, and in duplo or triple time or whatever, but we don't have time. So I'll better draw to it. So,
for questions, we have we have more than 15 minutes, and we'll just improvise our way through it. Anybody have any questions at hand?
May I ask one thing about the character of the text? When you do a Stephen note,
yes.
and you do the triple, does it work with a certain verse? Would it interest you or not?
Yeah, I mean, I have met cantors in Germany that have said, good improvisation should reflect the verses of the text. And so if there's a penitential verse or text, it should in a way reflect that. And if there is, for example, in the text some idea that happiness could be found, it would be a perfect example to do that. And I'm sure Bach did if he knew the texts so well. But I also think that this also was mentioned the idea of rhetoric today. And I also think that Bach's music would certainly have reflected the speeches that the that were given in church, you know, the sermons and the texts and the gospels and whatever was going on there.
Another question, when those very early Arnstatter Gemeindegesang begleiten to accompany the congregation, which was maybe not accompanied at all at that time, but when you see that harmony where he goes, and he goes completely wild.
Yeah, and I wonder how popular that was. I mean, I think that the people used to complain quite a lot, I think, about his chromatic harmonies. But I think that we often misunderstand Bach's harmony, that we think he's only wrote complicated harmony. And I think that there was a lot, maybe the ones that he wrote down were more complicated than the ones that he played. And I think there are also researchers who are making quite a distinction between the keyboard harmony and the vocal harmonizations. So the harmony may even be done like I did at the beginning, with 3 voices in one and a bass line, just to make a very simple start to the variations, you know.
I can agree, but I mean, if you play this accompanying for the congregation,
yes,
you almost think no congregation could enter.
Yeah, no, it's a fantasy congregation.
So maybe they were just listening to it to remember the melody or something like that.
Yes.
And he was the most creative guy.
Yeah, I don't think he was that popular.
Collective.
Yes.